I don't even know where to start with this one.
Well,
Returns
we
management.
actually
So,
started with some slides.
okay.
Sorry,
you
I
can do
keep forgetting
slides,
this
but-
microphone doesn't work.
yeah.
I don't want to interrupt Jan because she had such a great flow, so I just put a comment.
It's
Oh,
the
no, that's okay.
saying and yeah, it's
Hey,
encouragement.
I'm
Go
a
ahead.
female. I'm used to being
Oh,
interrupted
no,
quite a
we're
bit.
not doing
Oh
that.
boy.
No,
You have to
no.
fight
Oh,
through, especially with guys. I tend to listen to women more, but
the men are smiling. David's got his head down, and all the women are laughing at acknowledgement. This is not good.
I cannot imagine what you had to go through professionally for the kind of the time that you were coming up through a very much a male dominated world. So thank you, because I know it was hard enough for me, and I can't imagine what you fought through.
yeah, my daughter just keeps going, what? They did what? It was-
Yeah. Somebody
Never-
told me one time, isn't that cute? She has an idea.
oh no.
Yeah.
Is he
And now
still
I'm a
living?
thought leader. Do you know how many ideas it takes to be a thought leader?
Is he still living?
He's not employed anymore.
Okay. So he never met Count. No. Actually, now that you bring that up, and I won't spend any time on it, but I think my very favorite series of all time is Mad Men, because I love marketing and the advertising and the like, and the period piece, and just that inconceivable period where the women were treated at work like that. It's like,
Oh, what I used to go to conferences when I first got out of school, and there was hardly any women there. The women that were there were hookers, and it was it was nasty.
wow. Wow.
So it was yeah, they called them booth babes, and it was
Well,
just
booth babes is not a term that I outlived. There were definitely booth babes in the 90s. But hookers is not a term that we used in the 90s for our booth personnel.
well, the booth babes
Jan
were
is calling
hookers.
it like it is.
I was actually glad I was married because I didn't get hit upon, but I have used Ms. since then because a girlfriend of mine was a Miss and she got hit on so much, and they kept thinking my husband's name was Jan, but I quit trying to let people use Mrs. because with Ms. you couldn't tell, and that way it helped her. And my husband said he knew me just well enough that I'd turn around and punch somebody if they tried anyway. So
Okay.
anyway, we'll
So,
get on to happier
packaging.
things.
Now, here's my first question to start us. What kind of stuff gets returned?
Well,
'Cause
that's
I know,
part
Paul,
of
you
what
work in
our
demos,
yeah.
and you send out big pieces of equipment and they get a trial month and then they're like, no, we don't want this, take it back. I understand that concept, but are there
We
little
go
things
into
that come
that.
back too?
We're going to define that because that was part of the issue we had trying to figure out how to talk about this was what are we going to talk about? So we have a specific part, and there might be other types of returns that happen, but we're going to go into what we're talking about. Let me see. I need to share the screen. Let's see if it works. Can I share the presentation? Yeah.
Mhm. On the bottom there, there we go.
Well, no, there's different ways of
You
sharing.
did it. You did it. Just
So
click on enable editing, that button up there.
come on.
Okay. And then if you want to put it in presentation mode there on the bottom right, the very bottom, there you go. Well, we'll settle.
What are you
Hit
getting at?
just hit end slideshow for a moment, I think.
Did we
There,
swap
you did
it?
it. You got it. That's perfect.
I do
Thank you.
use this. Well, wait, we went the wrong way. We're too far. So we went to this, opportunities or headaches, customer returns. Okay, so Paul wanted to talk a little bit about himself. So he has his slide with his book. So Paul, do you want to say read it, or do you want to talk?
Yeah, right. No, I just put this in because it's always good to let people know where you're coming from. So at the core, I'm a sales guy, right? I mean, my whole career has been in sales. And again, everybody forgive me for my lisp and lurch. I had a situation where I ended up with a seizure and bit my tongue, and so forgive me. Many years in sales, but as you know, life happens. I ended up one deal and then another deal just by chance because of one experience, the other experience. I spent many years now, since 2004, in the supply chain space, selling it, running 3PLs, things of that nature. And then obviously, then I also got into buying and selling 3PL companies. Was involved with GoPro, thinking about, and Arista Networks, helping them get out of China in 2016 and 17, out of China and into Mexico. So I got a lot of the Mexican experience. And along the way, have worked a lot with medical device companies. So that's sort of my background. Happened to have written a book back in 2009. I feel like I need to write it again. The title is apt, but haven't got down to the second version. And the key takeaway here is that what I'd like to share with you today is the real importance to address returns management. So if you'll have any questions, I'd like to roll up our sleeves and get down into this. Hey, what does it really mean? How should we be thinking about it? Because you don't know when there's going to be a problem, and we'll get to that. But give it space and time. Think about the what happens if manufacturing makes a mistake and suddenly you're inundated with product. That happens and people don't plan for it.
Right. So with me, I'm sort of a techie person. I enjoy the engineering part of protecting products. And I have worked in devices for the last 15, 20 years, but I did foods, pharmaceuticals, and detergents. Detergents is an interesting thing for selling slippery water. And I've done independent consulting now because I get tired of working for big companies. I actually work on a whole bunch of things with sustainability as well as the engineering and distribution of stuff. And I like to work with standards committees so that we can write standards to keep people from doing some of the stupid stuff I used to do and make sure they learn what is probably the best way to do things, but try and teach and actually do some teaching, and also help new people understand that just because we have a certain way of doing things normally, that doesn't mean that it's the best way to do everything. So we try and put slipperies into some of the standards so people that know what they're doing can actually adjust them for themselves. So I don't know if you guys know what REACH and RoHS is, but that has to do with heavy metals and chemicals of concerns and things that you have to worry about with your packaging materials and actually your products too. I've ended up doing more with products than I ever thought possible because a lot of it's very similar to some of the things we have to worry about with packaging. So this is what we're talking about for return packaging. You know, you ship two, you return one, you ship it out again, you return it, or maybe you have to rework, or you have returns or recalls that have to go through. You've got returned electronics, either for stripping out and keeping the parts for other things, or making sure your hazardous materials are in the right place, or returning a product to be sent out later. And then returning biological contaminated stuff is really interesting. I'll never forget going in to look at a product once with a company I was with, and they hadn't cleaned it up from the hospital after using it in a person. So it was just full of blood. So I refused to touch it until I went and got my hepatitis shots. And then we have who's responsible for these returns. And there is a simple method or way to think about it. Whoever ships the product is actually responsible for the safety of that product going through the system. But if you've got your name on it and a company and you've shipped something or told some people how to ship something back to you, they're going to come after you. So you need to know what some of those things might be that you have to worry about. There are a lot of regulations that go out there, how you're going to return a sterile barrier system. So a product that's sterile has to remain sterile. If you're returning it back and forth, how do you know it's still sterile? There's returns for reuse. Are you going to clean them? Are you going to inspect them? What are you going to do? You've got hazardous materials that are being shipped. It could be dry ice. Batteries and magnets are real bugaboos out there when you're trying to ship them through the normal system. And then you've got customer complaints with liability issues that could be happening to you.
If you stay on that slide a moment, and first, thank you for bugaboos. I haven't heard that one time. Paul, a little commercial for you. You guys do all of this at Extron?
I mean, we could sterile returns. Yeah, absolutely.
All of these?
And more, yeah.
Do you, the function that you serve for your clients, is it practical for medical device companies not to engage someone like you and handle it themselves? Like how big do they have to be?
It's really about scale. The biggest reason I engage with a prospect recently, with Extron at least, is returns management, right? People make a decision. That's the biggest reason we get a new engagement.
Is that right? You lead
Yeah.
with
I mean,
that.
I had a situation, somebody in Texas, they were happy, they found a low-cost provider, and suddenly they had returns. And now what? The low-cost provider couldn't cope and couldn't provide this service, and now they were stuck in a rock and a hard place, right?
You've got to have the right traceability and handling of that, or basically you don't have a product anymore.
You know, we could add one more. There's so much to talk about here, right? We could add one more column, one more tab at the bottom under customer complaint is customer satisfaction. Managing a return is not as easy. You got to send an RMA. You got to make sure the customer is happy. You got to make sure that you're taking care of their needs. You're available to talk about it, that you know something about the situation. There's continuity, that they're getting the replacement product. All this has to fit right into the service as a whole. And in most companies, so yeah, we can do this, but there's so much more than this.
Billy, I just learned that you are an operations and engineering guy, so you're doing a lot of heavy nodding here.
Yeah, I appreciate this topic, you guys. It's like I'm reliving my nightmares all over again.
And you appreciate that.
Yeah. In my previous job, we made a implantable drug pump. So it was implanted in the abdomen. It was a pain pump, and it went down, and a catheter brought the isomorph or morphine to the base of the spine to deaden some of the pain.
I can't imagine any of those being returned.
Oh, yeah. So a pump would have maybe some problems or issues, and you'd want to do some analysis, some root cause analysis on it. So when I first got there, we had a return process, but it was basically left up to the sales people, Paul, to, get the stuff back from the doctor, that put it in bags as best they know how. And we'd get these things back. And we had an RGA lab, which you had to have your shots, and we went through a decontamination process. But what was left out when the process was developed is in the operations team, you have to receive these goods in. You don't know what they are, how they're packaged. So you open it up, and there's a person there in the receiving and shipping department, and they open up these boxes, and they're just, oh yeah, they're gross. And then my team gets upset at me, and then doing that. So we didn't hire someone like you or your organization, Paul. We should have. We did it on our own, and we got a bag and a sterile barrier, and then all the procedures and rolling it out to the groups and stuff. But it was, even in the 5 years I was there, it was never as firm in a robust procedure as it could have been if it was rolled out correctly, because there's some real serious issues with that side of it. And then of course we had ordinary returns and upgrades. Jan, we had some emails going back and forth in the week about packaging and stuff, but it was, we had batteries returned because we had patient held devices and upgrades, and who they go back to. It is really a thing. It's so much better if you start out with a nice firm process and work it out that way, instead of doing the ad hoc with someone like me comes in and is like, what the hell is going on here?
Trying to separate what happened to the customer versus what happened when they shipped it back in properly is a nightmare too, to try and get all those things. I worked with pacemakers at one point in time, returns with that. The hospitals just, they bore them out of a person. Sometimes they leave the skin and stuff. They usually clean them good, but then they put a whole bunch of them in a box. And you can't do that with batteries, lithium batteries, because they catch fire and do other things. And, they're shipping 100
This is where I'm like completely lost. We remove something from a human body and send it back to you for what?
Yes.
Do we expect our money back? What?
No, it's analysis and
Right,
review of what the components are like, and you
And
don't
RGA.
bury somebody with a pacemaker.
It's very important
sometimes
information.
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Paul, you're the guy.
Yeah,
You start.
There's a lot of information that can be gathered from these devices when you bring them back, right? I work with an EVR, a heart monitor device. It was a new product. They needed the units back. It wasn't even worth their cost to bring the product back, but the information on the device, what went wrong, how did it go wrong, that's important.
Here I am thinking like I return a sandwich because it wasn't made to taste. Like I don't like it and I want my money back. But what are all the reasons people send stuff back? Data is one that I didn't think about. What else?
And there are some doctors that your organization is kind of partnered with, and they speak very good things about your product and everything else. And then something fails that they had in a patient, and they go, "Hey, if you want me to continue to talk about your product, I need to know why these things are failing too, so I can, recommend your product going on in the future." So it's important you get those back and you do some type of RGA analysis to figure out why it happened. Is it a known cause? Is it something new? And then for the implantable stuff, we just went over how that stuff can come back, and it can come back any way, shape, or form. So yeah.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you guys.
One other reason.
What happens
So
a
one
lot?
other.
Sorry,
Michelle, go ahead.
I was
This
like,
is why
what
I don't
happens a
talk.
lot, Joe, is that you'll get like a complaint from a customer and you won't get the sample back. And if you don't get the sample back, you have really no idea
Nothing.
how it failed. Even for simple devices, they're talking about fairly complex things, but I worked with gastrointestinal tubes.
Yeah.
And, you could tell if you got the sample back, if the balloon burst, if it had been cut or overexpanded, or if it just actually burst, by the marks. And so, but you wouldn't know if you didn't get it back. And so there was no meaningful way to improve your product. And then also, if a patient dies in the middle of a procedure and the doctor is worried about litigation, they'll send every single thing back that was involved with the procedure, whether it went wrong or not.
But it might go to the lawyer first.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the other reason is that even if it's not a complaint, like it's out of warranty or whatever, it's a great source of information for figuring out where your product's going to fail first, and where you might have susceptibilities, again, for product improvement.
Yeah, that was the other comment I wanted to make. The other reason the smart companies invest in bringing product back is for new product development, product improvement. Very, very important.
Yeah.
Because you want to see, how do they fare in the field, right? It's not just about cost. Cost is a very important thing. So they might even decide, we as a third party provider, we would have rules that said, hey, just be prepared. We're going to stop receiving in general. We'll just tell people it's cheaper, just keep your product. We'll send you a replacement one. But we're going to have a rule that every 15th or 20th or 50th, based on how many returns they got, that we'd actually call it back. So be prepared to send an RMA, get the labels and stuff like that. So we work very collaboratively because companies need that information. I can't tell you how important managing returns is for the one, customer satisfaction, two, new product development, product enhancement, risk management, all those.
I do think it's an afterthought. Jan, on one of your earlier slides, you're like, who's responsible for these? Like, this thing came back. What are we supposed to do with it?
Yeah, well, usually there's a returns group that has something to do with it, but I was talking about the physically shipping it itself. There are laws and regulations that have to be followed that usually a customer doesn't know anything about, and they don't want to get the $20,000 individual fine and their company $20,000 fine for each shipment they ship back improperly. So if it's your product with your name on it, you need to develop some way for them to return it that's legal. So they don't get in trouble, because technically they are responsible for shipping something back to you that's not meeting the regulations, but they're going to blame you. Your
Michelle
company.
Or Marin, are there regulations for your IFU or something that as part of being a medical device manufacturer, you must spell out the proper way to handle a return? or no?
Not
That's-
my knowledge.
No,
Not
they're-
per medical, but there are other regulations involved, like with lithium battery shipping and hazardous waste and things like that. So this is an area where it's not only the medical regulations that apply, but there's other regulations that apply in this case too.
right. So here's just batteries.
Okay,
So that you know you have to have a special UN box and ship it back. But those boxes are for containment. They're not to actually protect your product. So you get something back you can do something with and learn what's going on. There are a bunch of, there is a good amount of information out there so you can do it properly, but do your shipping departments actually know them? But in any case, I'm saying that when it comes back to you from a customer, they're going to expect you to know what all the regulations are and give them the right information, because I can just imagine bad customer stuff going on there with your, customer satisfaction going into the toilet if you don't have something and they get in trouble with their shipping.
Yeah, the way we address that is, we do a whole review, and then we come up with a protocol, like if there's return request, automated request for this product, what is shipped out to the customer, right? What labels are shipped out to the customer, we'd write instructions, what to do when, with that kind of stuff. It's very important.
Oh yeah, it's very important that we know about that and they get to follow it, because you can't expect the customer to actually know what it is. Because I mean, especially if it's a hospital or a doctor, how are they going to know?
And it's a little bit different between the US and the EU. I would say that in the EU, with the disposal regulations and the information like that, the EU regulations are much clearer that it's the manufacturer responsibility to properly handle and take care of whatever's happening with the medical device.
And they're also very prescriptive of, like, the MDR says you must consider any of the other directives in the EU, even if it's not medical specific, if it applies to your product. And one of the first sections in your technical file, you have to make a declaration of all the directives within the EU that apply to your product, which include, words that they've already used, the REACH and the RoHS and, some of these others.
We and we's the big one when we're talking about disposal.
Oh yeah, for electronics. The IATA stuff is really strange. That's for air shipping, and that gets filtered down into individual countries too, but sometimes they don't always match up because they're not as fast as what IATA is. But you don't want to have your product being told you can't ship it on an airplane because you didn't follow the IATA rules, just because the country rules didn't quite catch up with it on how to do your shipping. So it's interesting, all the regulations you have to watch and monitor what's going on. There's actually rules for how you ship magnets too, depending upon the strength of the magnet. So you just have to know what those are. And those have nothing, they're not in the medical device directives exactly, but they do fall under things that you have to know about and work through. So it's fun trying to figure out how to do returns, Joe. Especially with the contamination.
You never know what you're going to get.
Yeah. That was when I remember that first time seeing that device. It was just full of blood from somebody they'd put it into. And
at the not this company, but one of the previous companies I worked for, I ran the facility. We'd actually literally, have this joke about, okay, what came in this time? You never know what you're going to get. I mean, and it's you'll send an RMA out for a certain product and they ship back a totally different product.
Or it isn't even your product. Sometimes
not even your own product.
Sometimes they ship you other people's products, and then you got to figure out if you were going to send it to your competitor or whatever. And
exactly.
It's even better if they send it back but they filed it MDR or adverse event with the FDA. And then you have to go through the whole rigmarole responding to the FDA that it's not mine, but they don't correct the MAUD database. So if people Google you, like this event for somebody else's product comes up under your company.
Right, exactly. Oh my
God. We got back one time a big David Bowie knife inside the box with the implantable pump. and the shipping guy opens it up and he sees this big, huge knife in there, and he's digging through all the packing. And, you know, he could have cut himself, but he's like, what is this knife doing in here? And after we contacted the sales team, and we got a hold of the salesperson, and like, oh, that's where my knife is. He goes, I was opening up a package and I put the knife down and I'm packaging that return out. And he goes, he goes, that's my father's knife. It's real special to me.
Oh,
And
for
we're
goodness
just like,
sake.
oh my goodness.
Yeah, and the other thing we used to get a lot of is you have the customer name, you have the address, they ask for RMA, and you say yes, we'll send it over. They say yes, yes, yes. You ship it out, and then you have a very irate customer calling back and saying, "I'm on vacation. Can you please send the RMA to Hawaii? The device is with me in Hawaii." Like, what the hell? Why didn't you just say that the first time around? You know, now I
Right.
gotta go to the whole process again. So there's a degree of flexibility that's required. There's a degree of customer service that is required. There's a huge element of collaboration with the company, with the field staff, right, with everybody involved.
Huge collaboration.
You've got to figure out protocols for standard process, then tier 1, tier 2, who's, like, you know, like John was saying, who's responsible. But even from a customer support standpoint, things will escalate. Don't forget, ultimately, it's customer satisfaction, then it's risk management. So how are you going to be nimble to address the needs that show up when somebody says, I need to send this back? It's a nightmare.
Okay, you guys know this about me. I have limited powers of retention. What I'm hearing from this presentation is this is not simple, and we should call Paul or Jan or Billy or somebody to handle this for us. Besides that, can you give me and we're only halfway through, but can you give me a Joe, if you remember nothing else, kind of thing about returns? Because I asked that of Jan, and she's, I don't know why this stuck with me so much. You taught me that packaging is the medical device. It's not just put it in a box, it's considered the device itself. Is there an equivalent like, wow, about returns?
You're asking me?
I'm asking anyone who knows the answer.
You know, for me, is a supply chain solution is incomplete without a protocol around returns, because they happen. So I would say returns happen. Are you ready?
Okay.
Yeah, returns happen. So yeah, because I was going into storage testing. I wanted to make sure people saw this as a potential distribution chain.
What on earth is that?
Yeah.
Well, this was my attempt to get my management to understand when we're doing returns that people are handling it. Right here, people are handling it. People are putting it on airplanes. There's trucks. This was a particular thing where we had a sub-assembly that came into the product. And if you followed around, can you see my
Yep.
pointer?
Sir, yeah.
Okay, when you followed around, these are all the handlings, the trucks, the planes, the stacking up on a tarmac or some kind of transfer hub before it would actually get to a surgeon in the US. Now, if it was out of the US, it would come around and do another set of handling before it would come into the surgeon. Now, in this particular case, we were sending 2 out and returning 1 all the time. So that would mean that the product would come back and go through this. If it's in the US, it only went through it once. If it was OUS, it came through this twice. Then it would come back up into the warehouse and be packed out for shipping and go through the whole cycle
I
again.
reinforce what I said before. Just ask Jan, because
This is amazing graphic, Jan. Like, this
Well,
should be your advertisement. You should.
Right.
Well, they were complaining because I was doing 10 drops on things, and I'm going, come on, guys. So I actually went through and counted handling for domestic versus US where it was coming out. So you could see how many times people were actually handling it and shipping it on a truck. So you had a lot of vibration going on, what's going up in planes. So there'd be pressure, how it was, other cases was sitting on top of each other, and you could see how it dramatically changes. And I'm sitting there going, I think 6 return round trips for a product that's supposed to be sterile, I don't want that in me. And so we were going through how we could do the testing to make sure the product still functioned properly and had things. And this was not even a used product. So
What is the example you gave of send two, get one back? What's the case scenario that happens?
depending upon what's going on, this particular one was an abdominal aorta aneurysm graft, and you measure that as best you can outside of the body. But once you get in there and can look around, you might find out your sizing is different than what you thought it would be. So they would send them two,
Like a medium and a
sizes.
large is the one you need.
Yeah,
to
sort of.
correct the other one.
And then
Now,
they'd send the one
theoretically,
back.
the one that you didn't use,
You didn't open it.
you didn't open it. So is it
Oh,
a
it's still
big
good.
issue? I sent you a sterile thing, you sent back a sterile thing. It's still sterile inside.
We don't know.
Well-
It depends upon whether there was holes in there or not, whether it got vibrated apart. See, all the times it's going through truck and plane shipment and people can drop it and do other things with it. You don't know if the sterile barrier is good or not, unless you do some tests to make sure it doesn't have any
Yeah,
holes.
By the way,
can't
our drop
assume it's
testing
okay,
trend
Joe.
will be at 10x.
Yeah,
So
we used to do a cochlear implant in along with the pain pump too. And every time a salesperson would go into the ER with the doctor, Jan, they would just like you said, they would always have two in case the doctor gets in there. There could be something wrong, or the doctor made a mistake, and they're going through and something slips, and they break the lead, or something happens that they have the patient opened up. You don't want to close up that and everything else, so you always have to have that other one, and then you gotta send that back through the channels and everything else. We had a real difficult thing with this pump. It had nothing to do, Jan, with compliance or MDR, Michelle, or anything like that. So the pump was steam sterilized. So there was water that always you couldn't get out all the water inside the pump. So if it went out during the winter time, that water would freeze, expand, and then you could have damage in the pump because now it melts, and the pump may work now, but it could not, it may not last as long or could have failures. So we had packaging that had to be instituted during the winter months, and it had to go in that packaging specifically, which would keep the pump for five days. And we validated it through those 5 days. But if it took longer than 5 days, or they didn't package it or return it back to site the right way, $5,000 of scrap every single time. So during the wintertime, I would put in the budget, there'd be $100,000 of scrap because of various issues from the sales team or a customer or something like that on one of those pumps being sent back or brought to another location. So it's not only compliance things, it's internal validated processes that affect.
Right, and that's the environmental conditioning that
Yes.
we try to make sure we institute. It's not required in the testing. What's required is distribution testing, which is the shock and vibration, or
Shock and value.
dropping everything. But environmental conditions just it affects products so much. I had one product once, it was in vitro diagnostics, and we had found out what happened when it got too hot, but we didn't realize when it froze, it wouldn't work anymore either. So we had problems in the wintertime and had to institute a different way of shipping to make sure we never froze as well as never got too hot. And that's sort of important when you're testing for organ rejection. But it was it's interesting with all that, because they were trying to ship it all back too, and they wouldn't put it in the right kind of packaging system for us.
Yeah, that's fascinating, Jen. Yeah, it's great stuff.
Well, and I have this here, some temperatures that have been measured on tarmacs, trucks, airs, it's something that people don't think of too much, but that can affect, like you were saying, with freezing. I mean, look at a car in the wintertime when you have trunk stock for salesmen, what can happen in their trunk. That's incredible. So figuring out how you're going to get all those pieces going, it's just nuts. Anyway, the rest is where Paul was going to start talking on different things instead of me doing most of the talking. Paul, do you want to?
I'm going to make one
Before you guys hand off,
here.
Wait a minute.
since we're talking about temperature and shipping and whatnot. Hey, Jan, what do you think about it when people say, I'm just going to ship this from Southern California to Northern New York? And we're going to just say it went through all the temperature zones and
Right.
real,
I tell them they're
real,
nuts. They're just
real
absolutely
life simulation.
I had to do a confirmation on temperatures and testing for a product once, and it took us 3 years where we would ship to different parts of the world during the 4 different seasons with temperature monitoring to prove what we were doing. But it took 4 years to get it all done, and it worked out that I had guessed right. I was so happy.
This would not be suitable work for me. I can't imagine how repetitive and exacting and hair pulling that must have been.
Well, I didn't get to work on it all the time. It was a little piece over here that you worked on once every quarter and got the stuff done. In the meantime, I worked on other things that were much more fun. Now we keep interrupting how do we say your name? Marin? Marin. So let her talk for a minute.
So what I wanted to say is this is absolutely fantastic to see. And the place where it often gets dropped, and Jan said it, is it doesn't get in the product requirements.
Mm-hmm. That's what I
So
was kind of alluding
Joe
to.
asked specifically, does this kind of stuff need to go in the user manual? Well, no, there's no requirement to put it in the user manual, but the manufacturer is required to put in or to provide to the user all of the information that's needed to use the device safely. And in this case, particularly if you're talking about returning unused product, that goes into the whole use model of what you're doing with this product. So your requirements should talk about it's going to be returned 3 times, or it's going to be going through these environments, or all of those things that the design team needs to know as part of both designing and testing the product. And so, it's expensive to go through sterilization checks after 4 cycles of shipping. But if you want your product to do that, you have to do that testing front. Otherwise, you end up missing it. So this is such awesome information to see. And I would just encourage you to make sure we're talking with your companies that this is going back to the design team, that the requirements are getting captured there. So the next time product doesn't come out, the company's not going through the same kind of, well, I thought it was this. And then you do have the evidence and the confidence that it can go through 2 cycles or 6 cycles or whatever it's going to be.
Can everyone feel
But-
the love in the room? I just love this. Pablo.
Yeah, I want to thank Mar. Thank you, Mar. Forgive me. Thank you, Mar, for that. But I want to jump right in on something she said, right? You go through a product that's going 1, 2, 3, 4 cycles. Guess what? We can interpret that as a provider, and we have that there are different things you're going to do with the product that has been returned 3 times, returned 4 times, returned 1 time. It's not eligible for, in quotes, X type of client or X type of usage. So we can take that information we have in the past and say, okay, now you got your B stock, you got your C stock, you got this, you can only send this to, there are certain protocols or eligible type of deals or clients or situations you're going to send a product that has been returned 4 times versus a brand new product. But my point is, yes, there's so much more that goes into it. And then from a risk management standpoint, how do you extend and how do you then influence your distribution models? Who's getting what product? Because ultimately you're trying to make money, right? You want to be very, very cost effective.
Eddie?
So I have a couple of quick questions. And first, before I start those, an apology to Marin. For some reason, my Zoom was I was asking these things in direct questions to Marin, and I didn't realize that until just now. So sorry about that. So my first question is, how much of the return is actually manufacturer's liability? And then, question 2 is, how idiot-proof do we have to make this then for our customers? And my probably most important question is there a simple equation to determine whether there's any economic value in getting this stuff back?
Sure.
Because when you're talking about cycling things 3 times, I'm going, how valuable does that thing have to be for it to make any sense?
I think that goes back to the data example, but what other examples are there?
Well, so the simple math from a shipping standpoint is simple. This is not about, medical device situations. You want the data back, but simply companies make a decision. Hey, what are the costs me to produce this product, right? And what are the costs of managing returns? And you do the math. That's the simplest one. But in my opinion, there's an inflection point when that is irrelevant, and then that becomes relevant, right? So the inflection point, we had a little heart monitor that we sent out. It would cost them, I think, $12 or $18 to make. Retail price is $149, right? Initially, for a year and a half, we managed returns. We brought the product back because they wanted to know what was going on. They were realizing it was shipped out different batches from manufacturing, because they do run small batch manufacturing runs, and they had different firmware, different problems with the firmware issue. So we would get back product. But after we streamlined that, it did not make any financial sense to return the product. So we just sent a replacement because we want to keep the customer happy. Now, if you have a medical device where it's much more robust, you can reuse it. You want the data back, it's built to last, and it costs you, hypothetically, a lot more money than the return fee, just the cost of goods. You absolutely want to manage that back. Recently, I had a customer that the unit was $1,500. The return fee alone was $400 or $500 because it weighed 150 pounds. At $1,500, they were not worth all the profit went out the window if they brought the product back.
Mhm.
So we would say just return the brains, if you would, but not the
whole thing.
Yeah, the whole thing. We bring that back, and even that they didn't reuse it, but just to show that customer, we care. Kind of, it was really customer service issue. They really didn't even need that unit back, but that was electronic parts. It was very cheap. But yeah, so obviously every situation is different, but the math is very simple. And perception also is very important. Perception is very important. Ultimately, it's customer satisfaction. You're developing your brand. How do you want to be seen? Because if you tell somebody, just leave the product there, we'll send you a replacement, it comes across as very cheap, right? And people manage that as well. So yeah, those are sort of what I've been seeing in the field, but how somebody makes a decision. But initially, my gosh, you want to learn as much as you can from the field and bring product back.
We had one product that I worked with. It was $2,500, but it took 6 months to train the people to make it, and then it still took 3 months to get certain sizes made. So we always returned so we could have the different sizes that we needed for shipping out to the doctors. So
yeah, so that's a good use case, right? Where you need those components, so you bring it back. But now with manufacturing, and manufacturing models and processes and components and everything is so modular, electronics are really cost effective, very cheap. And if you design things effectively, you can design. And this is where I like to go on, because another big part of what we do is on the exact opposite side of that supply chain equation, where we help companies bring components and give them the flexibility to bring components, especially in today's supply chain world. It's so tough to get components sometimes. Get you the flexibility, and then we put components in. This makes a huge impact when you're managing returns. Because if you can do it in a modular fashion, one, maybe you can send a replacement part to the customer. Two, you might be able to bring the component back, and then like over here, the third part on the screen here, repair and refurbish, it makes the processing of the return so much easier. If your DFM is designed for manufacturing, is built so you can bring longevity, you can bring flexibility into your product management, right? And then our returns strategy gets improved, because now we're just doing a quick replacement. We got B stock, we're ready to go. You're protecting your investment. You're protecting your cash flow.
So Paul, to that, and I know that one of your value propositions is this concept of last mile manufacturing, where you get everything as close to the customer as you can, do the last bit, send it out. I guess the converse is, and send it back here instead of, with the alternative.
Instead of all the way back to
China?
imports, the factory in Asia, what have you, right? Yeah, exactly. That's a huge value add.
Huh. Yeah.
By the way,
sounds
I'll give you an
great, like
example.
sending it back to China to be refurbished and then send it back across the.
it tends to be cheaper.
Yeah,
No, we've had situations like that. So I had a situation where it was one of these kid like a night light that it wasn't a medical device, but it was a company out of Mountain View. They had this night light for children, and the lights would change, the music would change, kid would go kind of stuff. Unbeknownst, and this could happen to any product, right? unbeknownst to the manufacturers, this was obviously a problem in China. They switched manufacturers. The manufacturer found a chip, was not the spec Intel chip, but a local chip that had all the right configuration. They switched it over and they dropped it in. And this new chip that they used might have saved a few pennies or what have you, or components. It worked until the first minute after the first year. And after 365 days finished, that chip failed. And they had literally, I was bringing in thousands, 15,000 returns, trying to manage that. Unbeknownst to them, right? And it took us a while to figure out what the problem was, and then they figured it out, and then we had to start scanning every unit and which batch, Now, typically, if it's within warranty, the manufacturer in China would have the responsibility to replace it. Guess what? The warranty is for 1 year. These fail after a year. So it's a nightmare. But my point is, as a company, product company, you've got to think about these situations and have the infrastructure so you can catch these problems, you can respond, you can bring resilience to your supply chain.
I didn't realize how integral returns management was to your value prop.
Sorry, what did you say?
I didn't realize how integral your value prop, this returns management element is.
I mean, look at these things. Let's just quickly go down this, right? You want to be able to test and evaluate, hey, what am I getting back? Do I have a Bowie knife or do I have the real good product, right? Now, if there's decontamination, detrashing, when I ran the facility in Fremont, I would literally, me, myself, rent U-Haul trucks and dump product at the county dump over there, right?
Well, may I ask, for medical devices, again, I started this conversation really having no appreciation for returns other than I didn't like it, which is, I realize, just silly now. How big an issue is this for this industry? I mean, can you say, yes, 100% of the companies will have to deal with returns, or yes, but only a few, but there's half of them that really need to, I mean, this value prop about returns is really important for some. How big is that as a function of the industry?
For me, obviously, because I'm in the industry, when I hear somebody who says, yeah, we don't really manage returns, I'm like, you're walking around with your pants down. You're going to get hit. Everybody needs to have a return policy. You might not have a big problem today. You might have less than 1%, 2%, and you think, hey, we can handle it. We got an intern who can manage it.
Yeah, an intern, right.
Right? I mean, that's what happens, right? Until, unbeknownst to you, no mistake of your own, something happens and boom, you got a problem, right? So my point is, it's like insurance. You better have it. You better have a strategy because you're going to need it one day.
Do you find that catastrophe is the catalyst that gets them to look for a solution? It wasn't a problem before, so I never had to explore your value prop, or they knew about it and they're like, yeah, that doesn't really.
For the immature prospect, somebody who's just looking at the bottom line, who's trying to, get the lowest cost providers and just keep the doors open, yeah. But the mature people think about it up front.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Jan, bring us home.
Bring you home.
I don't know how many more slides you have. That is.
Oh, well, there isn't hardly any. It was just some case studies that Paul had put together, and we just.
Yeah, I already alluded to this one. I've already alluded to the other one as well. But yeah, doo-doo happens, right? And
half the people on this call you'll see in a week and a half, which of course delights me. So you can continue the conversation in person.
Yeah, it's part of what I do, especially with electronics, is actually design the packaging going out to be used to come back to, and that's just been a really good thing to have available. For other types of products, they do get back, but like Paul, they don't always have a good way of having returns, but we do need returns coming back to do the analysis and see what's going on with them. So you've got to think about it. I really like the idea of risk assessments and setting it up so you can understand what you need, and then actually allow yourself to be flexible, because you're going to get some weird things coming back once in a while that have nothing to do with your product. You've got to know what to do with that too.
Yeah.
And don't leave it to an intern.
Yeah.
That's the biggest problem I have with most packaging in companies or how they're doing things. The people with the least amount of experience and training are actually looking at everything coming in, either before it's used on the production line or after it comes, you know, it's going out of the company in logistics and then coming back and seeing what's there. And you can't, you need somebody that really is concerned and knows what's going on to analyze
I
what's
was thinking
happening.
that. I mean, I remember like the energy we would put into the product and selling it. And I don't remember anyone being that involved and passionate about what happens next.
No.
And I don't know how hard it is to find the what happens next people to be as energetic as like your front line.
Well, it's because they don't get paid. They don't get paid for that. So you're not going to get the people as
Well,
energetic.
Maybe that's
So,
what
another, Joe, if I could do a shameless plug from a cost analysis standpoint, imagine the cost of hiring or assigning 1 or 2 people, right? 2 returns management. It's much cheaper to have an agency like us manage, because we manage it by the piece, right? I mean, we build just for what we need, what we do when we do it. The cost and for the quality of service, we can offer it at a fraction of the cost.
I'd like that if in your workshop in 2 weeks,
Yeah,
you could break out the costs. I think that'd be interesting for the audience.
sure. I'll tell Sandeep. Yeah.
Okay, good. Next week, my guest is a fellow who has his own foundation, and he's a neurogastroenterologist. And he's going to talk about the research he does and his foundation. I just thought it was broad and different and a topic that would be interesting. So that'll be next week. And then a request for you guys. I had a speaker cancel on me, so now I'm scrambling to fill a spot. Hit me up on Slack afterward if you have a suggestion for a topic or someone who can be in San Diego in 2 weeks. That'd be very helpful and very appreciated. For Joe Hage Enterprises, this is Joe Hage, and I'll see you soon. Thank you, guys.
It was great.
All right,
Good meeting.
bye for now.
Thanks, guys.